All right, so I ran across this story and wanted to share it because there's a lot of similarities between what Hal is experiencing and what I have been experiencing, even though he has a physical disability and I have a mental disability. Life on the streets for somebody who's disabled and not a drug addict is it's much the same. So this is Hal. Sorry. Actually, I think my face is going to be too big. Let me fix this. Okay. When the new homeless shelter on Hollywood's Schrader Boulevard in March 2019, Haisalon Selfmade was one of the first people to move inside. He's white, transgender, and spends most of his time in a wheelchair because of a medical condition he was diagnosed with at age 9. He has Stickler syndrome, a painful and progressive genetic disease that leads to brittle bones and connective tissues. Hal and his partner moved to Los Angeles a couple of years ago from Tennessee after his transition became apparent. He says he was forced out of his apartment by an intolerant landlord. "I'm not staying where I'm not wanted," he said. They'd been living in a tent outside the Hollywood YMCA when they are offered a place at the A New Bridge home nearby on Schrader Boulevard. It was part of a new breed of interim shelters where people could recover from the trauma of life on the street, be given medical services, and 3 meals a day before being moved into permanent housing. Hal and his partner were told within 90 days they could expect to be connected with a wheelchair-accessible housing unit, and they could afford on their roughly $1,200 a month income. They moved in. But the housing didn't materialize. 90 days passed, and then 90 days passed again. Meanwhile, Hal says he was bounced from one case manager who couldn't find an apartment to another who wouldn't set appointments with him. He says conditions inside the 72-bed congregate shelter were rough at best, and that he didn't feel safe because of transphobic threats aimed directly at him. Plus, Hal says he saw regular use of hard drugs inside the shelter. Drug use is not allowed on site, but active substance use is not grounds to kick somebody out of the program. It's the basis of a model of substance abuse treatment known as harm reduction that aims to provide a place where people can detox with support. While Hal fully supported treating addiction as a health concern and supporting people who struggle with substance abuse, the reality of someone illicitly smoking meth in the next bunk made him feel unsafe. Finally, after 8 months in the shelter, he was asked to leave. Hal recounts an off-site altercation where he claims he was defending himself and his partner from an aggressor. Officially, Hal says he was exited from the program for being a danger to the shelter's on-site staff. So he and his partner set up camp on the street around the corner from the shelter, just a few blocks from where they'd been before. Despite having gone through the system and been at the site for more than 90 days, Hal was little closer to finding housing than he was when he first decided to move into the shelter. "I'm a shoo-in. I'm disabled from birth," he said of his prospects of getting housed. "I have a genetic condition that causes degenerative disc disease. There is no reason for me to have been out here as long as I have. The housing first model," he says, "shouldn't be a giant runaround." This is him at a protest in 2020. This was just a couple of months, about a month ago. Politically speaking, there is a reason Hal has been outside for as long as he has. Even though Los Angeles Homeless Services System embraces the housing first philosophy to end homelessness, its success hinges on having access to a robust supply of subsidized housing. Finding a unit of housing that meets Hal's unique needs is like looking for a needle in a haystack. "If it's in my price range, it's not accessible. If it's accessible, it's not in my price range. If it's both accessible and in my price range, it's too far away from where I need to be to get my medical care. In fact, one of the reasons Hal opted to move into the shelter on Schrader Boulevard is because it was only 1 block away from his doctors at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. With a long list of medications and complicated palliative medical conditions and drug interactions stemming both from his genetic disability and sex transition, the LGBT Center is likely one of the few places in the entire country where Harold can actually access comprehensive medical care. This picture here is what a single bed unit looks like in the Bridge Home shelter. It's literally just, it's just a bed. Stepping back, it's no secret that LA has a shortage of inexpensive housing. It's one of the driving causes behind the region's escalating homelessness crisis. Even for those without Hal's particularly complicated circumstances, the perpetual bottleneck in LA's homelessness service system is that the amount of low-income housing actually available is far eclipsed by the number of people who need help. The result is a homeless service system that staffs thousands to get people who are already homeless ready to move into housing, but struggles to rehouse them before more people end up on the street. The 72-bed shelter where Hal stayed for 8 months is a good example of how the system doesn't work as well as intended. In its first 17 months of operation, just 29 people were placed into permanent housing. According to the site's operator, another 76 people either left the shelter voluntarily, moved into another interim housing facility, or were asked to leave, like Hal and his partner. These results, experts have told LA are largely consistent with other interim shelters across Los Angeles' homeless service system. Since he left the shelter in late 2019, Hal has been living on the street nearby in a tent, large enough for his wheelchair. He spends almost all of his time in the area because its proximity to his doctors and because of his mobility is limited to where he can't get on public transit using a wheelchair. Sorry, I can't. Bleh. But since a Bridge Home site opened last year, those same city blocks are now inside a city-designated Special Enforcement and Cleaning Zone. These zones are an integral part of the A Bridge Home program and can be found around almost all the roughly 24 sites now open in Los Angeles. They were conceived by city politicians to coax house residents and nearby businesses into accepting the proposed shelters by promising extra sanitation services and police enforcement to keep other homeless people from setting up camp in the designated area. The zones stipulate rigorous enforcement of municipal codes that allow the city to confiscate unattended items on the sidewalk, plus other provisions intended to dissuade camping in the zone. It means Hal has to make sure his possessions are never left unattended, often defending them by reciting legal code to police officers who attempt to make him go somewhere else. If you don't use a very specific language, they will find loopholes to make you move, he said, and because I know how to speak, I have made them leave me alone more than once. The daily process of holding on to his few belongings, which include his wheelchair, medications, and documentation, is exhausting and takes time away from efforts spent getting off the street. But not everyone living outside is as articulate as Hal. And the day-to-day reality is that homeless people's belongings often get seized and thrown away. Consequently, advocates for the homeless are suing the city in federal court over the zones. They argue the zones violate the 4th and 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Hal's view is that the zones aren't really about cleaning, they're about making homeless people go somewhere else. Nobody wants to see the unhoused, but this cleaning is not going to make us go away. You cannot wash us away. We are here. We are a part of your community. And the sooner you start treating us like the neighbors that we are, the sooner we will all get along and everybody's better off. Hals still hasn't given up hope of finding an affordable wheelchair-accessible housing unit that's not too far from his doctor's. For now, he says case managers have told him he's on the wait list for a coveted Section 8 housing voucher. Not that a voucher is a guarantee of finding a unit, but it's something. Okay, so let's get my face back up. There's the ugly bitch. Alright. So I'll sit here next to Hal and we'll talk. Because I understand. You know, I'm not trans, so I don't understand that part. I'm not gay, I don't have a spouse, so I don't understand that part. But I do understand a lot of what he's going through. The promise of housing is consistent, but it doesn't happen. You know, when I got my Section 8 voucher, it was only supposed to be a couple of weeks before I'd have my Section 8. Well, it's been over a year. That's the problem. When I was living at the church, they thought I was lying about having a Section 8 voucher because I wasn't getting housing yet. But the reality is that having the voucher doesn't guarantee housing at all, ever. The voucher can expire before you find your housing. And it's not because you're not trying, it's because they don't accept you. There's not enough units. There's so many homeless people, and there's not enough to go around. And when you do find one, something happens and you don't get in. Like with the last one, I waited for about a month and a half after being accepted for it, and then they said that they couldn't work out a price. Well, the price was listed. They changed it. And now I'm waiting on one. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how long it's going to take, you know. But the church, I felt immense pressure from the church to get out of there. And one of the things Hal says here is, we are your neighbors. One of the things that the pastor said to me was that this was a neighborhood. Why couldn't I have been a neighbor? You know, and that's the type of thing that hurts. I'm a human being. If I'm sleeping in a tent or in a truck in your neighborhood, why can't I be seen as a neighbor instead of a burden that needs to be gotten rid of? And when I was in the tent, I lost my tent a lot because you can't work and live in a tent. Because while you're gone, somebody will take your tent, or they will go inside it and take anything that they want. I once had somebody go inside my tent and take a shit. Not kidding. I went to work because at the time I was working as I was doing audience participation stuff for TV shows, and I would be gone for 4 or 5 hours, and I came back from work one day and somebody had taken a shit in my tent and taken my food. And that's the kind of thing that you deal with when you're out there on the street. My tent was stolen at least 5 times, twice by police. And many more times I saved my tent from being kidnapped by the police. They would have specific times that they would come, and if you were there, you could pack up your stuff and leave. But obviously if you weren't there, they just took it and anything in it, and there was no way to get it back. They say there's a way you can get your tent back if it's taken, but there is not a way to get your shit back. It's gone. It's thrown in a dumpster. Like, it's not neatly rolled up and put into the bag where they can give it back to you at the police station. It is crumpled and thrown in a dumpster and driven away. And then this homeless person no longer has a tent or a bed or a blanket or whatever else was in that tent, all because I decided to work for the day and earn a couple of dollars to buy my weed. You know, I'm not gonna lie and say I wasn't buying weed with the money I was earning. Of course I was. It was the only thing I was using. And sometimes you have to stay in areas where you don't feel comfortable. You have to stay with people that you don't feel comfortable with just to be safe. For about a year, I shared my tent with a man who was on meth. I didn't do meth. I didn't feel comfortable being around somebody that did meth. But I also didn't feel comfortable being alone, because before I started traveling with him, I had been raped multiple times by sleeping in the park. And I had been touched many more, and I had been beaten, and I had fought, and I had been through a lot before I came across this guy who had stayed with me in the hostel and knew me, became homeless. So we ran together, but it was uncomfortable, and it was a necessity. Being a homeless woman, sometimes having a man with you is a necessity. And we never dated. It was never a romantic situation because neither of us wanted that. But both of us knew that we were safer together, And that's one of the things that a lot of people also don't understand about homelessness, is it's dangerous to be alone. And I've been staying alone because I'm scared of other people, It's frustrating because your caseworkers, they'll constantly tell you your housing is just around the corner. We're getting you ready to go indoors. We're getting you ready for the housing. And then month after month after month goes by, and everybody's looking at you and thinking that you're the reason it's not going through. The pastor straight up thought I was lying to him about having a Section 8 because it was taking so long. They said I wasn't doing anything. It wasn't that I wasn't doing anything, it's that the system is set up to fail. I'm in a hotel now, but I don't know how long that's going to last. Tuesday I might have to leave, or I might be extended. I might have a Section 8 apartment to move into, or I might have to go look at another unit. This could go on for another couple of months, or it could end tomorrow. Well, probably not tomorrow since tomorrow's Saturday, but it's... My therapist literally called me 2 months ago and told me I had a move-in date. And then things changed. And they change so quickly. And it's often blamed on the homeless person. And it's just, well, that one didn't work out. We're going to try again. As if it's not another month outdoors. As if it's nothing. Because to the caseworker it is. And I've also been through multiple caseworkers and multiple therapists. It's a revolving door. And it's not going to be fixed anytime soon, I'm afraid. Not as long as everybody just focuses on getting rid of us. Because you're not going to just get rid of us. I'm not saying that as a threat, because I want to hinder your life or make your life miserable by living in your view site. It's just a fact that homelessness is not going to just go away because you enforce the laws to make us go away. We're human beings.